Good evening, this is Brass Tacks. I'm Zakka. Jacob. Recalled former Indian High Commissioner to Canada, Sanjay Kumar Verma, has broken his silence. He has said that him being included as a person of interest in a murder investigation felt like a backstab from Canada after having served as a diplomat in that country for at least 2 years. He also said that there is a tiny minority, according to him just about 10,000 or so, in a community that is more than 8 lakh strong who are hardline Khalistanis. So the question then is, why is Mr Trudeau pandering to this tiny minority? Here are some excerpts from the interview with Ambassador Verma, and then we'll go across to our guests.
After a bit of conversation, then they told me that I, along with 5 other Indian diplomats and officials, are persons of interest in the inquiry of killing of Nijjar. And therefore, there was a request to waive off my diplomatic immunity as well as diplomatic immunity of my colleagues. This demonstrates kind of a backstabbing. But unfortunately, so far, despite whatever talks they have done in public, we have not seen a shred of evidence from them. Or we have not been shared. I shouldn't talk about what they have or they have not. We have not been shared any shred of evidence. Due to lenient Canadian legal system, they were able to get their permanent residence in Canada, citizenship in Canada. They sought asylum in Canada. According to the last information that I have, 5 of them had been resolved. 21 are still pending. And these are pending since decades. So I would say that there is an inaction rather than consultation.
Interrupting for some breaking news that's just coming through. There's been a terrorist attack in Gulmarg. This is an attack, we're given to understand, on an army patrol party. This is in Gulmarg. Remember, just a few days ago, you had that attack against construction workers who were involved in constructing the parts of the tunnel that connects the region to Leh. This, we're given to understand, is a developing story because we don't know in terms of the casualties or if anybody has been hurt or if there have been any fatalities in this. But what we do know, the preliminary information, is that there's been a terrorist attack on an army patrol party in Gulmarg. Let me just quickly get a word in from Ishan, my colleague. Ishan, any further details?
As far as that, this is in Butapatri, which is just ahead of Gulmarg, and the area is controlled generally by the army, given the fact that the LOC is very close to the area. But not a lot of infiltrations have taken place during the last 20 years through this particular region and has been a tourist hub. But today, there was an army patrol. We are told they had inputs about possibility of militants being present there, but they came under a heavy fire, after which some of them have taken some hits and casualties, and they have been evacuated from the location for the best possible treatment. And as we speak, the area is still under cordon. There are still bleak details available because the incident has just taken place as the sun set. But this is an area which is known for tourists. You know, there are every year a lot of tourists come to Kashmir to visit Gulmarg, and this area has been one of the most peaceful. If you have seen that last 2 attacks have been in these areas which have been most peaceful, or where the guard has generally been down, given the fact that those areas have been by and large very peaceful. And this is where they have chosen to target. And now security will synergize and see that what they can possibly do to plug in all the loopholes. But as of now, the details are that there are some casualties that the army has taken, and the injured have been shifted. There was a fire that was retaliated by the army as well. The top officials are reaching the spot. We're told at least 3 injuries to the army men are there. But as we speak, because of the night there, the possibility of operation being carried out is being done, and they are checking that whether they could have possibly come from Poonch, because on the other side of the Gulmarg, it is the Poonch which has seen the most number of attacks and such incidents take place. So the army is calculating and seeing what all had happened, and now the top officials are trying to reach Gulmarg to ascertain what really transpired during that time.
And Ishad, very quickly, because you mentioned this, the attack that we had on the construction workers, the construction party at the tunnel a few days ago, is also in this vicinity, right? It's in this region, and this has relatively been, as you said, peaceful, at least for the last many years. Any particular reason and anything that the security forces are telling you as to why this region is suddenly the target of terrorists?
Well, one is that these have been easy zones for them because the guard has been down, as I pointed out earlier. Because Sonmarg, Gulmarg are tourist resorts, not a lot of foot presence of the forces and troops there. They haven't seen any violent action in the last 20 years or more than that. They have been the most peaceful areas of Kashmir, and that seems to be the gap that they are trying to exploit. And given the fact that the security forces have upped their ante in rest of these areas, and that's why these mountainous areas, Gulmarg is a mountainous area, Sonmarg is a mountainous area, they are trying to hide there because there's been a mounting pressure on in the mainland, and that's why a lot of foot presence is being moved to these areas by the army and forces now.
All right, Ishan, we'll come back to you as and when there are further developments on this story, but this is a developing story. An army patrol party has been targeted just off Gulmarg, and as Ishan was pointing out, details are still awaited, but it looks like there will be casualties in this attack. Let me now go back to the Canada story. Open this up to our guest, Rajiv Dogra, former diplomat, joining us. Sushant Sareen, senior fellow with the Observer Research Foundation. Dean Baxendale is a Canadian journalist. Ujjal Dosanjh, former Canadian minister in the Conservative government. Zafar Islam, national spokesperson of the BJP, is also joining us. Let me start with Ambassador Dogra. You know, the stuff that the former ambassador, the recalled Indian ambassador, said about what's going on in Canada. I'll start with the first part where he said it felt deeply hurtful, the fact that he was serving there as a diplomat for 2 years, and then suddenly he was named as a person of interest in a murder investigation. He said, and I quote, "It felt like a backstab by Canada." Can you explain to our viewers, Ambassador, having served in many nations, this whole idea that, you know, Indian diplomats are doubling up as raw agents, or at least that's the allegation by Canada as far as this ambassador is concerned? I mean, just how absurd is it?
Well, it's obviously absurd, but more than that, it's highly irresponsible, because Trudeau should know well that his ambassadors and his senior diplomats don't go around snooping on others. But yes, it is their duty and responsibility to keep a watch on anything which hurts the country's interests, in this case, India. So if a very experienced and very mature High Commissioner Sanjay Verma was keeping in touch with the media of Canada, with the society leaders in Canada, with opinion makers in Canada, that was his responsibility, and he needs to be congratulated for it. As far as Trudeau is concerned, I think he has done damage to his own country more than to Mr. Verma, because everyone knows Mr. Verma's reputation and those of his senior diplomats. So that is a laughable accusation.
Okay.
No one will take it seriously. But Trudeau, because of his internal political compulsions, has dragged his country into the mud. He has done dirty on India. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
Again, the world is not going to believe that. But the other thing, more serious thing, is that he has encouraged the Khalistani extremists to do whatever dirty tricks they have in mind.
You know, the thing that I found which stood out, and I want to ask Dean Baxendale this, the ambassador also said that, look, he was asked a specific question, how many, you know, Canadian Sikhs do you think are hardline Khalistanis? And he said about 10,000 at best. This is in a community of 800,000 plus. Now, even if one were to buy this argument that, you know, Trudeau is doing this for political purposes, he wants to pander to try and get the Canadian Sikh vote, if there's just 10,000, let's even, you know, double that. If it's 2x, let's say there are 20,000 Canadian Sikhs who are hardline Khalistanis out of 800,000. It still doesn't add up. Why then would a politician, at the end of the day, a politician, you know, does things for votes, right? Why would a politician, just for 20,000 people out of an 800,000 strong community, pander to its worst instincts?
You know, and to my many Sikh friends here in Canada who are just appalled by, you know, this current situation, those very peace-loving, you know, Canadian citizens who want no part of any of this diaspora politics that is dividing our two nations. You know, it makes no sense for the Prime Minister to elevate this the way that it has happened. There were ways in which to approach the Indian government. The Canadian government says it had done that. But you're right, for 20,000 votes or 10,000 votes, what is this pandering about? But we have to look at diaspora politics. We have to look at consulates by other nations as well that have engaged certainly in activities to suppress what we call transnational oppression, as you are aware that is taking place. But it makes no sense politically to do this at this juncture. He's not going to win any friends. He's not winning the election next time. It makes no sense.
Forget about winning the election. He might be out of a job as soon as Monday. Sushant Sareen has been vigorously nodding his head. 40 MPs, that's what we're given to understand, Sushant. 40 MPs in Mr. Trudeau's own party have told him, literally given him an ultimatum, decide by Monday whether you want to continue or leave. 40 MPs have told him to leave. I mean, that's the reality that faces Mr. Trudeau. Sushant.
Zakka, who cares about what happens to Trudeau? I think he has damaged India-Canada relations irretrievably, at least for the foreseeable future, because even if supposing there is a change in government in Canada, I don't see how whoever comes into power next is going to do anything different, simply because, and pardon my saying so, you ask a very naive question. How many people do you need in a mafia organization to run a city? And this is a mafia. This is a very well-organized mafia which has infiltrated various branches of the Canadian government, of Canadian social life, of the diaspora community. As the High Commissioner himself said, they threaten, they intimidate people. And if you get hold of these 10,000 people or a bunch of them, you can actually start changing the electoral results or get electoral results which you want, regardless of what anybody else says. So look at it as a well-organized mafia operation which is involved in drug running, which is involved in human trafficking, and they are on record that they are involved in human trafficking. They are involved in all kinds of nefarious activity, and then if a mafia group receives the patronage of the government of the day or people in power, what do you expect the rest of the ordinary people who are hardworking people who just want to go about their lives and their jobs and take care of their families, what do you expect them to do? You expect them to stand up, these thugs? Now, somebody like Mr. Dosanjh will stand up. He has stood up in the past. There are people like Balraj Deol who will stand up, who have stood up and paid a price for it. But most normal people will not do it. And that is the other reality Canada is not ready to confront.
So let me ask Zafar Islam this. The ambassador also said, Mr. Verma, that look, Nijjar is a terrorist, no two ways about it. But in a democracy and as a democratic country, any extrajudicial killing has to be condemned, is not acceptable. He also said that, but it's been over a year since that killing happened and we haven't seen a shred of evidence either privately shared with the Indian authorities or even in the public domain for that matter, because the trial is yet to start. You have this, and then you have the US ambassador, Mr. Garcetti, who's given an interview earlier today, where he has said that this is unacceptable because as fellow democracies, you cannot be going around killing people on the territory of other countries, or at least in the case of Mr. Pannu, it was an attempt to murder him. At least that's the allegation from Mr. Pannu and his associates on American soil. So draw the contrast for us. On the one hand, yes, we all agree that you can't just be killing people off on foreign soil. I mean, that's not acceptable. But then these are people who have blatantly indulged in anti-India activity.
First of all, you have to understand, Zakka, that the responsibilities of the responsibility of the Canadian government was to provide information. We had asked not once but 26 times either to extradite all these nefarious elements who are living there and getting shelter from the Canadian authorities, or the information regarding Nijjar's killing. But they have not provided, but still, for the sake of saving his own seat, Trudeau is actually to get support from some political parties who are actually being dominated by Sikh, are the ones they needed his support. So they are actually, for petty politics, they put India in the dock. But everyone understands that India is not even involved in this, and that's why they have asked for information. They have not shared the information, and just to he had to appear for some on 16th of September some commission he had to appear, where prior to that he actually declared these 5 senior officials of IFS officials of India that they are persons of interest and their diplomatic immunity should be removed.
No, but Zafar, you still haven't explained to our viewers the difference. So you're saying India was not involved in the killing of Nijjar, and if the Canadian allegation is that it was, then please provide evidence. But India was involved in the threat to Pannu, which is why this ex-raw official has been removed. He's no longer a government employee.
No, the committee has been formed. The committee is already in US. They are doing investigation because that person who is about Yadav, what they have mentioned, is no longer with the government. Secondly, that needs to be ascertained whether what is the information they have. So the committee is meeting with them.
Okay.
Let them share the information with Indian committee which has gone to US to investigate this matter further, because it is absolutely wrong.
So why don't you send the committee to Canada also?
US or for that matter,
why don't you send the same committee to Canada also?
See, Canada doesn't want this kind of investigation. Canada is merely making allegation and they want to just spit and run away. That is what, because Trudeau's intention is very different than the US authorities.
So this is a shoot and
authorities
scoot.
welcomed this committee and said,
so it's a shoot and
you
scoot
do the
operation.
investigation, we will cooperate with the investigation.
Let me ask Mr. Dosanjh, who has been a minister in the previous dispensation when the Conservatives were in power. Mr. Dosanjh, so this interview by the recalled Indian High Commissioner in Canada, he has said a couple of interesting things. One, he said, how can you label a diplomat as a person of interest in a murder investigation? He says that felt like backstabbing. He's also claimed that this entire situation between India and Canada, and this is practically the nadir of the relationship, certainly in the last 2 or 3 decades, has been driven singularly by Mr. Trudeau's scorched earth politics, his unpopularity, and it has nothing to do with the wider Sikh community in Canada. That's what the ambassador has said. Mr. Dosanjh.
Well, I think I'll take issue with Mr. Verma's numbers. I think there are no 10,000 hardline Khalistanis in Canada. They're much fewer in number, except they bludgeon their way into the temples. They do violence and threats. And therefore, people essentially do not want to be part of these ongoing battles to control temples and the like. And when they control temples, then they seem to be turned into, by the government of Canada, by the politicians in Canada, the representatives of the Sikh community, which they aren't. So I believe numbers are far fewer, but be that as it may, what other stuff Mr. Verma has said is true. I mean, these guys engage in drugs and gun smuggling and the like, and they do violence on Canadian soil, and they engage in threats to other Sikhs on Canadian soil. And that's why you don't hear too many of us speaking out. I only speak out because I've been doing so since the 80s. And I'm old now, so it doesn't matter to me ultimately. But, you know, this is a very serious issue.
Okay.
I heard Mr. Verma's earlier interview in Canada, and he said some interesting things, and I haven't seen any rebuttal to any of what he has said. And
from the Canadian
it makes
government.
clear to me that Mr. Trudeau, both times he spoke on this issue publicly, once way back about a year ago when he spoke in the House of Commons, and then recently when he spoke following the press conference of the RCMP, it seems to me that he's basically engineered those two appearances and those two speeches for his own political purposes. That's not to say that he doesn't have a national interest to defend. If there are serious allegations, as serious as they are, that Canada has made, then it is a question of national sovereignty for Canada, and therefore Mr. Trudeau has an obligation to defend that sovereignty.
Going back to the point that Mr. Dosanjh made, and the ambassador also made this point, that the reason why the wider Sikh community in Canada seemingly is supportive of this is because these guys indulge in gun running, in human trafficking. They threaten other Sikhs. and he specifically said they target the daughters and families of other Sikhs, Dean Baxendale, and therefore no one wants to be on the wrong side of these folks. So my question is, whose job is it to stop these guys from becoming this, extra constitutional authority? It's the job of the Canadian government, the Canadian law enforcement agencies. Why aren't they doing that?
Well, this has been a problem within our country for the better part of 40 years, but certainly more so in the past 25. The diaspora communities, which have gained prominence, obviously, by population, they're influencing Canadian politics. But these ties, unfortunately, to organized crime groups that have been allowed to permeate and expand to a point where we are having organized crime being involved with transnational repression and election interference by directly funding politicians. Organized crime is actually helping to fund liberal, members of parliament, as well as conservative members of parliament. There's influence inside the system. The RCMP does not have enough resources to tackle these issues. They've been telling the government for this for some time, and it has been going on deaf ears, which makes us very vulnerable to this kind of situation where we end up, unfortunately, on the wrong side with that issue.
It's so bizarre, Dean, that, you are saying on television here on an Indian channel that organized crime is the single biggest election interference issue, and there is a commission that's been put out to look at foreign interference in Canadian elections. But anyway, be that as it may, let me ask Ambassador Dogra, because one of the other things that Ambassador Sanjay Kumar Verma also mentioned, which I think was fascinating to me, he said Sikhs have been going to Canada since the 50s, since the 40s and 50s. They used to go by ships back then. In fact, the early Sikhs did not even have voting rights in Canada. The reason why eventually Canada had to give them voting rights, make them full citizens, was because of just how much hard work they were putting in and how integrated they had become into Canadian society. The problem of Khalistan actually started in the 80s. It's not something that we saw for the first 30, 40 years of Sikh migration into Canada. So the question that needs to be asked, and I think the ambassador did not say it in as many words, the question that needs to be asked is, what changed in the 80s? What changed in the 80s is Mr. Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, and politicians around that time from the Liberal dispensation started giving a free run to these folks. And that is what changed in Canadian Sikh politics.
Absolutely. In England is now relatively controlled, but there are other centers emerging, Italy being one, Germany being the other.
Okay.
Couple of points. First, it is not the number. I mean, your guest from Canada, the media guest, may be absolutely right that there may be 4,000, 3,000, 2,000 or whatever. It is the control of gurdwaras where they indoctrinate people into voting in a particular pattern. That is why they're getting the number of seats that they get. Because had it been just those 3,000-4,000 voting, then they wouldn't have got that many seats. The second, as you pointed out, and Mr. Dosanjh pointed out, is the issue of campaign funding, which is extremely important, not just in Canada, but everywhere in the West, America in particular. So they have twin advantages over any other community, that they control the money power and they control the temple, Gurdwara power.
Okay. Sushant, I think, wants to leave. So before that, Sushant, so basically you have organized crime, you have human trafficking, you have gun running, you have collection of money from Gurdwaras for nefarious businesses, what Ambassador Dogra was saying, and this whole business of threats to other Sikhs. This is a deadly cocktail. And then to say that, this is not responsible for, and on top of all of this, you have a lenient legal system. A legal system which gives a long rope to all of these folks, and then you turn around and say, oh, there's foreign interference, oh, India is indulging in transnational repression. The problem is within. You need to fix this.
Zakka, the irony is that all of this is happening in a country whose rulers, like Justin Trudeau and that clueless foreign minister of his, say is a rule of law country. I don't know whether it's a rule of law country or a country of rule of lawlessness. Because what is happening on the streets of Canada, really, and in these communities is lawlessness, and pure, simple lawlessness, which is happening because the authorities are turning a blind eye to it. And then you have a Canadian Prime Minister and a Canadian government with the temerity to take pot shots at Indian diplomats for doing nothing more than their job. What do Canadian diplomats in India do? Do they not keep a lookout on what's happening in Indian politics?
Exactly.
Who's talking? Do they not go and meet people? Do they not gather their own information? And none of this is surreptitious activity. This is the job of a diplomat in any country, anywhere in the world, right? If they're doing their job, these clowns are saying that this is foreign interference. Number one. Number two, journalists in India tweeting about something which a Canadian has said is construed to be foreign interference. But it's mind-boggling that a country which is as decent as Canada, or has been rather, has people running it who are of this kind.
Okay.
So it's absolutely crazy. Just one more point. Zakka, when you asked that question about why this started in the late 19th, early 1980s, please also look at what was happening geopolitically and geostrategically. That was the time when you had the Soviets moving into Afghanistan, Pakistan becoming a handyman for the Western powers to ensnare the bear in Afghanistan, and there was fears that you need to keep India destabilized because India was seen as being in the Soviet camp. So you destabilize India by propping up the Khalistanis, which is why you had the Brits, you had the Americans, you had the Canadians turning a complete blind eye to the murder and massacre of people. More than 30,000 people were brutally butchered in Punjab. And none of these white people had anything to say about it. They neither condemned it, they did not go after the guys who were involved in those massacres. They did nothing. And they give us lectures on human rights and transnational...
I got to get the final word. Zafar, again, Mr. Trudeau is in power today. Maybe by Monday he'll be out of power. But the bilateral relationship has to be retrieved. I mean, you have, at the end of the day, 1.8 million Indo-Canadians. I mean, you can't just, let go of them or say, we can't give you consular services and we can't give you other services, diplomatic services, etc. I mean, Trudeau is, like I said, a temporary fit on power. Tomorrow, if he's not there, maybe the relationship can be restored. But then you can't allow the relationship to deteriorate. Zafar.
Zakka, you have seen in last 11 years of Modi government, where we have always extended our hands of friendship to every country, but we will never compromise with our interests. As long as they reciprocate, we will always be a friendly country with them. We will definitely want to have better equation with Canadian authorities, Canadian government. As a country, we respect Canada and Canadian. But of course, if they are working against our own interests, then we have to safeguard our interests. Secondly, let me tell you a very important thing. I also visited twice this city place called Surrey.
Yeah.
And all the time I had whenever I got the opportunity of a Sikh driver, because most of the Sikhs are driving
taxis
cab there. I used to ask them why. I used to ask them why you support this kind of. He said most of them, in fact, 80-90% people, they said we do not support. It's only people who have migrated to Canada in 60s, 70s. They are rich. They control Gurdwara, or they are the one who fund these activities.
Okay.
So majority of Sikhs, they are living there actually pro-Indian, but there are a handful of people who are actually doing this kind of activities.
I got to wrap up. I'm completely out of time, but thank you very much to all our guests for joining us. Let's see if forget about the politics behind it. That it's well known now, but hopefully the relationship, the bilateral relationship, can be retrieved, even if it's in a post-Trudeau political dispensation there in Canada.